Man in Black, Soul Survivor. Hey guys, loving the podcast. So I have a crock pot. He said crack pot.
He has a crock pot?
He has a crock pot theory.
What's he cooking for us?
He's cooking up some beef and some stew. Welcome to Shat on TV Westworld Edition. My name is Roger Roper, also known as The Raj, and I am one of your three co-hosts that does a podcast here for the hit television series show Westworld. Alongside of me is my faithful companions Big D, Dick Ebert.
Good evening.
And Gene Lyons.
It's good to be back, gentlemen.
Yes, welcome back. You were in Gothland out in L.A.
That's right, Das Bunker, 20th anniversary. 3 days of heavy drug use, heavy drinking, and goth dancing in an all-black warehouse in L.A.
So we definitely missed you, but we're glad to have you on. This is the inaugural episode of what we're calling Westworld Telegraph. So this entire episode will be dedicated solely to reading and responding to listener emails, and the feedback that we've received has been so great and so tremendous. I just want to give a tip of my hat to everyone who's taken the time to write in. It really means a lot to us to have this kind of engagement, and because of that, because we are avid podcast listeners and because we've written into podcasts, we wanted to give this the due diligence necessary to respond accordingly. And Big D, you and I have talked about this. When we write in podcasts, we love hearing them read.
Yeah, it's nice to know that your voice is being heard and that you're being taken serious and kind of engaged both ways. With this show, it's even more important because the international release of it kind of is a few days apart depending on the country. And we have a huge contingency of international listeners. So if we were to only do email on our Monday podcast, which we released Tuesday, we'd be missing out on a huge group. And I think it was validated this week by the amount of email that we've gotten in the last 24 hours.
Well, not only that, but Gene, you strive to keep this podcast, our big podcast anyway, to an hour. And there's no way we could answer emails and do a full podcast under an hour.
Absolutely not. I think you guys hit the nail on the head when you said that we want to get to all this stuff and treat it with the quality response, but at the same time, you got to respect people's time, and anything longer than an hour is no good for me. I don't think it's any good for the listeners. So, but we're very, very happy to give, a half-hour bite on Sunday night and then the full hour on Tuesday. And then now we're getting to the listener mail. I think it's a perfect solution to a great problem to have.
And just for our listeners who are tuning in and want to follow along, if you write in to the Westworld Telegraph, we will post your theories and your emails on our website. Just navigate to shatontv.com and click on Westworld Telegraph, and you'll see all of the emails and theories there, and you can follow along at home as we go through. So, gentlemen, with that being said, why don't we fire up the Westworld Telegraph and dive right in? The first one comes from listener Brad. His email is entitled William and Logan Relationship. He writes, "It's crazy to me that no one else caught the relationship between these two. They're soon-to-be brothers-in-law that probably work together. When they arrive at the park and meet the hosts, Logan references having sexy with the hosts, which William is not into. And Logan mentions, you don't think my sister rode a bunch of cowboys when she visited, do you? It's a bachelor party, brother to the bride, and groom-to-be. Thanks, Brad."
I didn't even realize I didn't pick that lineup the first time. I want to know what his sister did in the park. She must have rode the cowboys.
I mean, I know that I noticed that line immediately and thought simply that they're acquaintances and that, he happens to know his sister. I mean, that's something normal between friends. But later on, actually, when we got in episode 3, started realizing that, this is a brother of the bride and the groom to be. I think it does give us some insight, though, to the fact that maybe in this future world, this is a perfectly acceptable practice, right? That there's nothing taboo about it. And that actually keys us into really how uptight William really is, or how much of a white hat he really sees himself as.
Jimmy Simpson, the actor, actually tweeted that the family that he's marrying into, Logan and Logan's sister is from a very elite, wealthy family. So maybe this is perfectly normal for them to go off and have these giant type of relationships. I get the sense that William is from a working class family and he's not used to these type of extravagant vacations.
Yeah, and I like the fact that HBO is not being sexist here. I think they're showing that women enjoy the part as much as men do, and that it's accepted. Women deserve to ride a cowboy.
There were tweets earlier around episode 1 when women were tweeting. They're like, well, what's in it for the women? And I countered, well, they're talking about they want the bad boys and they don't necessarily want Teddy or a nice guy like that. And they're like, oh, so that's all there is? There's sex for them? And I was like, no, absolutely not. They could be heroes. They could be gunslingers, as we've seen. They can be whatever they want to be. So yeah, I really appreciate that equal treatment of both. Although, predominantly and it's realistic, the people having the Western fantasies are men.
So Brad, thanks for pointing that out. Again, we didn't catch that on the second episode, but definitely the third episode, I think everyone caught on that there was more of a brother-in-law type relationship here. So it'll be interesting to see how that relationship continues, especially now that Dolores at the end of episode 3 falls into the arm of William. Will William be tempted and go astray, and how will Logan respond to that? Our next email comes from Michael, entitled Love Your Podcast. Hey guys. Love your fantastic podcast of Westworld. Love hearing it while driving in my car at work. It's amazing how many details you notice while watching Westworld. However, I haven't heard you comment on the different ways Dolores opens her eyes and her bed. Keep up the good work, Michael. And he's from Denmark, another one of our international listeners. So he wants to talk about the way that Dolores opens her eyes each episode. And this is a recurrent theme. In every episode, we've seen Dolores in her bed, eyes opening. Your thoughts?
Well, when you look at, you guys had mentioned it before, that there was an impressive acting job here by Maeve and by Dolores when they do wake up, and you kind of see that rebooting and how it's different each time. Personally, everything in this show is done with a purpose, so the fact that they do show her waking up repeatedly, and even before that they show the music dropping and then her waking up repeatedly, there's a lot to be seen in that, and in the acting jobs here, much like in the hosts and what Dr. Ford is striving for, it's all about the subtleties.
Yeah, and I think the key is we don't see any body movement. She is still. She's asleep. The eyes open, and that's like we said earlier, it's the welcome screen. That's her turning on.
We introduced the idea of the theory that Bernard possibly could be a host because he describes waking up in bed and kind of that rebooting phase that he goes through every morning where he wakes up, he doesn't know where he is, he doesn't know who's in the bed with him. Is that the type of thing that goes on in these hosts' minds when they wake up or they reboot every morning?
Yeah, I imagine it's like you've woken up after a heavy night of drinking, where it takes that split second for you to think about, man, where am I? Where's my keys? Where's my pants? Do I have my phone? All right, I'm okay. I know where I am. I get the feeling when she opens her eyes, it's clearly that she wakes up blank slate, and then her programming kicks in, her daily loop starts, and the narrative goes.
Thanks, Michael, for writing in. Our next email comes from Ben. Ben writes, philosophy topics in Westworld. He's like, I've noticed some very interesting philosophy topics being explored in Westworld, and these include free will and determinism, the singularity, identity and the role memories, meaning backstories, playing and maintaining identity, and the nature of thought and the inner monologue. Wanted to get your feedback on that. Thanks, Ben. Guys, your thoughts?
A lot of people have said that, Westworld could be the next Game of Thrones, or people are saying it's almost as good as Game of Thrones. This is really what sets Westworld apart for me from other things on television. As much as I enjoy the entertainment factor of Game of Thrones, and there is some politics involved, there's some scheming, there's some family history, and some surprises. What it really lacks, I think, is that these deeper philosophical issues. And the cool thing about Westworld is if this show leaves us at the end exactly where it started, it still gave us something. It gave us something to talk about. It gave us something to think about. It's not about this linear progression of the storyline. We could actually go over just 2 or 3 days on the entire 10 episode stretch, and I'd be perfectly happy with that because of what it's bringing about in conversations. And like you guys said on the last podcast, it's 60 minutes of viewing and 90 minutes of talking about it with your friends.
Yeah, I think Game of Thrones works well, but it's all on a flat surface. It's a singular layer. You have all human players playing with one goal and one set of rules. Here, we truly have wheels inside of wheels. Teresa Cullen talks about it in the first episode where she says there's what's going on in the park, there's what the employees think, and there's what the corporation thinks and what the corporation's goals are. I think it works on so many layers. We can talk about human morality and what are we doing as a species, and then you can also talk about AI, and are we pushing technology too fast and too far without asking the question of what are we going to get ourselves into? Especially with technology today, this is no longer really science fiction. Within the next few years, we'll be asking ourselves these questions. When technology becomes an integral part of your life and has a personality and becomes sentient, we can't turn it off. And I love that. I love at the end of an episode when it forces you to think.
I think also in addition, if we want to tackle these things, the concept of free will and determinism, or the concept of the singularity, this idea of do people actually have free will, or are we all just agents that have a fate that's in store for us? Or, the idea of when, artificial life and artificial intelligence kind of comes into its own and is the next step in the evolution. The show so far, what I really appreciate, hasn't taken a stance either way. It's putting those ideas in your head and it's leaving up for conversation. But you really don't know, in this case, free will, for instance, this idea that, for the host, is it better to know or not to know what you are and what happens to you? Is it better to have free will at risk, or is it better to have a sealed fate that's safe? Or the idea of are the robots better than we are? Is artificial intelligence better than we are? I love that in all these are all up for debate. It's not a show that's preaching to you and telling you this is the right one and this is the wrong one, which is the temptation and unfortunately the tendency of most entertainment out there.
I think there's one more theme that's real subtle, which is power and people's perception and their feeling that in today's modern world, they're powerless. Fight Club talked about it with the change in the male gender role and what defines a man. And we hear it multiple times that the guests come to experience the power that they can't have in their normal life. So I think that's another topic we're going to even get further into as the season goes on. They might be telling us they're feeling, the writers, that in the future, as technology rises, people's feeling of their own independence and their own will and their own freedom might become challenged.
I think again, thanks for writing in. It's all summed up in that one line. When I think, is it William and Logan, when they're coming into Bark, they're still on the train and they're talking about, you think this place, or you think it's all tits and ass, but that's not truly what this is about. I mean, Gene, you talked about how that's the writers talking directly to the audience, correct? It's not just guns and shootouts and robots and sex and boobs and HBO. It's truly, there's so many different layers to the show, which already in 3 weeks has shown to be just a massive connection with the audience.
I mean, this is going to sound incredibly pompous, but I feel very badly for the people who are watching this show and only seeing it on a single level. And they are out there. I mean, there are people, obviously not fans of this podcast, but there are people out there on Twitter, on Facebook, who are like, I don't get it. It's disgusting. It's sick. It's boring. I mean, I can't even believe that people are saying it's boring, but that are really looking at this as like, and if you look at it in a straight narrative level, it's like, oh, keep seeing the same scene over and over again. It's the Wild West. People talk too much. We keep going back to this lab and it's old people blabbing on about whatever, So I could definitely see that. Without these philosophy topics, Ben, the show loses, to me, 90% of its worth easily.
Thanks so much, Ben, for writing, and we hope to hear from you again soon. Our next telegraph comes from Jill. She's questioning what's real, guys, so kind of with that same theme of philosophy. She says, first, I think we're asking the wrong question when it comes to who is a human and who is a robot. I'd like to know who has decided that characters have to be one or the other. This isn't some crazy tinfoil. I just think that it seems odd that the word human has made its way into the dialogue. Sure, there are plenty of references to people, but most often we hear the staff talk about guests and hosts. Even more interesting, the significant placed on our interpretation of the word real. She gives some examples here. In episode 1, the little boy says to Dolores, "You're one of them, aren't you? You're not real." Episode 2, from William to Clementine, "I have someone back home, someone real." In episode 3, Dr. Ford to Bernard, "Remember, the hosts aren't real. They aren't conscious." So she asks, what is real?
Thanks, first of all, Jill, for bringing this up because it's a good one. And I wrote back to her. Actually, I couldn't wait even for the podcast to write back to her immediately on the website on shatontv.com. But basically, I completely agree that saying it's just human or robot, that's a very restrictive paradigm. But I think we have to respect also that Michael Crichton created Westworld with this concept, right? With this concept of human and robot. And taking it anywhere else by HBO, while they're certainly, welcome to do that, I think loses the spirit of the overall nature of the show, of the story. You could change a lot of factors, but I think that hosts and humans have got to be, that's integral. If we're going to pin any one thing down, that's it.
So she continues. Second, there are plenty of theories about Dr. Ford playing God, but why does he have to be playing? Are we so sure this world has anything to do with the future of humanity? Who's to say this isn't a story about the beginning? This is a wild theory, guys. She says, "I'm not convinced the hosts aren't human, at least in part. And to that same end, I'm not so sure the Delos staff members are human, nor do I necessarily think that they're robots." She thinks, and these are her words, "I think they're the personification of God or multiple gods. Think about it. This being creates creatures that look like him. They're given an intended path. If they don't follow the rules, they're condemned to an eternity of standing lifeless in a damp, sweaty, dark locker room underground. These creatures are asked to confess what they've done or what they know goes against that narrative. And the question that decides whether or not they get to wake up, have you ever questioned your reality? How is this show not a show about God?" And listen, Jill is the perfect viewer for this show.
Well, to go back to our first half, and I think it ties into this, where they're talking about real, human, artificial. It can be both. We're assuming that humans have developed the technology to create an AI which is equal or superior to the human brain. There is another possibility that they didn't develop an artificial intelligence, but they've found a way to transfer human knowledge, human intelligence. There's some crazy theories out there where people believe that maybe Arnold's his personality or his soul or who the essence of who he is has been transferred into a host or an artificial vehicle for that. So it could be both. They could be a mechanical shell which holds a actual human intelligence.
I'm pretty sure that Dick just called my theory crazy, so I'll take that with a grain of salt.
Did I step on you there? I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just saying, I just blogged about it earlier this week. But anyway, but regardless, I think we can all agree that that religious overtones are always going to creep into any story that gets heavy, right? You got a show that's got high aspirations. God's going to be coming in. And I think that we've talked a lot about different literature that's impacted the show, whether it's Alice in Wonderland or Shakespeare. But there is a heavy, heavy dose of Paradise Lost in this show. And I think that, again, tying to Lost, we've also seen some connections there. And I think Jill really is keying in on that there's this idea that, if you look at it from this perspective, right? Say Westworld is Earth, okay? And that the hosts are actually what would be man, okay? Now, if that would make Dr. Ford God, it would make, cold storage hell, essentially. And what does that make the humans? Well, I think it makes them demons. They're the ones who visit and interact with, but are not naturally in this world. And they're the ones who are affecting change one way or another, bringing knowledge where it's not meant to be, bringing clothing where it's not meant to be, bringing temptation and will where it's not supposed to be. And if you look at it from that perspective, I mean, the two line up very well. So I think that's a very astute observation.
Jill, thanks so much for writing in. We hope to hear from you again. This next telegraph comes in from Jez, entitled, I have 2 crackpot theories. Hey guys, great podcast, and thanks for the episode 2 Instacast. So, I've now watched both episodes twice. In episode 2, one thing really stood out to me, but no one else agrees, so I thought I'd put it out to the experts. William and Logan seemed like a flashback to me. Example, the Man in Black origin story. I think this is because the first scene where they show them, it's faded on the word remember. Then there's other evidence to support this. Number 1, there's something about the arrival terminal that reminds me of the cold storage from episode 1. Number 2, William bumps into the dude in town, which is what Teddy usually does. Number 3, there are people in town drafting for the war, but not the bandit hunt. In my mind, it's most definitely a flashback, but I am the only one who sees it this way. If this is true, then I have 2 crackpot theories. One suggests that William and Logan are tied to the corporation somehow. They are brothers-in-law. But the more likely theory is that William falls in love with Dolores, is heartbroken because she never remembers him, is horrified at the things they do to her, and is trying to set her free. The deeper level is where he can download his consciousness into a host, probably Teddy, and live out his days blissfully with Dolores. This also points to larger interests of the corporation. Probably to have all the world's elite all live in this world and thereby solve the population problem. Just my 2 cents. Keep up the good work, Jez.
First of all, I want to comment, Jez, thank you for calling us experts. That's very kind of you. Very kind. Yes, I agree. If you've listened to the podcast, I agree there are, we're seeing multiple timelines weaved together. Some people don't see that. What they've done with the writing and with the show that's so great is it could be either way. You've got half the audience thinking yes, half the audience thinking no, and now I have no clue. It could go either way.
I do believe that I'm still a believer in the time shifting of the narrative. I don't believe a lot of people thought at the end of episode 3 with Dolores shooting Rebus and then falling into the arms of William that this showed that everything is in one time frame. Again, I did not see, and this is going to be my skeptical take on Westworld until the day I die, is going to be until I see a camera following a character, and even then, like from one scene into the next, and even then I probably won't buy it. I mean, we just saw a scene where Dolores sees her new father's face turn into Abernathy's face, where she sees Rebus turn into the Man in Black. We've seen Maeve see a face change. And so I think I agree with what you guys said on the last podcast that we could just be seeing this through the eyes of hosts. We could be in different time frames. I think that in the end, there will be some sort of a crescendo in this season where it's going to tie together and we're going to see this. But I'm still a believer, because of the way the simunitions worked, because of the entrances, because of the looks of things, because of the logos, there's just too much evidence pointing to different time frames. And I'm going to stick with that idea.
Yeah, I think also the show would be missing out on some of its best material if you just abandoned the plot of the movie. By saying there was a terrible event 30 years ago and never addressing it would be a waste. The first uprising 30 years ago is key to the entire story. I predict that I think this season will tell both stories together the way they're going right now and will climax with us seeing the original uprising 30 years ago. And at that point, the show has the 2 timelines diverge and we start following forward from there. But there's no way they're going to pass up on those juicy bits of that movie because the rebellion is epic. We're going to want to see Dolores rebel and start killing those dudes. She deserves to kill some humans.
There's a lot of other telegraphs that address timeline examples that we'll dive into, but there's one thing that we haven't focused on yet, which is the interest of the corporation. She theorizes that the corporation is there for the world's elite to be able to download their consciousness into hosts and live out their days. Is that the ultimate goal for the corporation?
No, I think that ultimately the corporate's goal is to possibly replace their powerful, wealthy guests with artificial versions of themselves, release them back into the park under their control. If you could replace world leaders, key heads of industry, Delos could secretly take over the world.
Big D, I'm going to have to agree with you on that. And my proof is Beyond Westworld and Future World talked about the idea of sending in hosts that are replacing their human counterparts. So I think there's definitely, we're going to see that as part of the storyline. So Jez, thanks so much for your telegraph. Our next one comes from Jill. She says, Teresa equals a host. Hey guys, first, I love your podcast. Keep up the good work. Second, on the question of which of the staff members are hosts, and it seems likely that at least one is, I'm on the Teresa Cullen side. What really tipped me off is when Bernard makes a remark to her about her eye movement when she's angry, and how and how he wants to take a photo of that. Something about her facial tics in that scene are just off. I can't describe it. More of a, I know it when I see it. And his wanting to take a photo, it's almost as if he knows she's a host and wants to figure out what's in her code that allows her to have those facial moments so he can add it into his. That also, of course, then plays into whether or not she is practicing and error correcting after sleeping together. If he knows, he's sort of testing or teaching her. Also, when Sizemore asks her when she gets to rotate back home, she doesn't actually answer, which would make sense if she's already home. Plus, in a conversation with Bernard about quality assurance getting upset if she's got smoking indoors, I feel like we're being led to believe that she's head of QA, which, if she is a host, is just amazingly genius. Again, keep up the good work that you're doing. Looking forward to future episodes. P.S. I'm also a believer in the William equals Man in Black theory too. Jill.
I felt that Bernard was looking at Teresa, much like an artist looks at a scene in nature, whether it's movement of an animal, whether it's a bird, whether it's trees. He was trying to pick up human traits, human movements, to then put into the host. I couldn't imagine that it was reverse. If there was a tick that she was showing, it would have to be an error, something that he didn't like. If she was demonstrating a human trait or a human tick, that's something he would want. He'd be happy with it. He wouldn't need to take the picture. She already did it correctly.
I mean, I see where Jill is coming from with this. If Bernard is looking at her and going, wow, like maybe this is a reverie or, something to that effect, and that he wants to record that to show his team, as he says, I want to show my team. For me, somebody was boning a host in that apartment, but I think it was Teresa boning the host. I think Bernard is the host, and there's so much more evidence pointing that way, from the reminders of his son by Dr. Ford. When you don't know what specifically his son died of, it appears to be a disease which is supposedly eradicated in this world. There's also, the video conference with his wife, which seems to be kind of just doesn't sit right. It's immediately timed after his conversation with Dr. Ford, and to me, Bernard is showing, more evidence of being the host. But again, none of this is certain. I know we had one comment on the site, where a visitor said that we were so conceited and we thought we knew everything. Just a guess, but to me, it's Bernard. And I think that the voting on the site on shatontv.com, you can vote on who you think is a host. And Bernard, after this week, just took a huge leap and went right past Dr. Ford.
I'm on the Teresa is not a host bandwagon, but thanks so much for writing in, Jill. Our next telegraph, obvious nod to South Park, Max. Hey guys, found your podcast on iTunes, and it's a good one. Thanks for doing it. Loving the Westworld TV series. Here's a couple things that you may or may not have noticed. Number one, the obvious nod to South Park. Oh my God, they killed Teddy, you bastards. Also, I noticed that Ford has a key phrase that he says to the robots that seems to switch them into another mode and gives them control over them. Something like, you will do that, won't you? That I think he's used on the old robot in episode 1 to get him to zip himself up in the bag, and in episode 2 on the little kid to send him back down from the desert where he was supposed to be. Anyway, looking forward to more episodes and more podcasts. We get Westworld on Tuesday evening in the United Kingdom, so the podcast comes out at the perfect time for me. Cheers, Max. Again, another international listener there. So guys, Dr. Ford's key phrase, we've talked about the reverie phrase, we've talked about the violent, these violent delights have violent ends phrase, but and we've seen in the technicians use some other phrases, more technical jargon. But it's interesting that he's pointing out Dr. Ford has almost like a God mode that he's whispering. Or is that accurate? Are you guys seeing that?
I've noticed all the other phrases, but I did not pick up on that one. So I'd have to go back and look, Max, to see what it is that he says. But that's a really fascinating one, and I'm really glad you brought that up. That adds a dimension for me as far as watching what Ford does say to people.
I'm more fascinated by the nonverbal keys. He stops that snake and gets the snake to move off without saying a single word. So it's obvious that he has some ability to control hosts or the livestock without even using verbal commands. And we've never seen anyone do that.
I'm equally fascinated that they watch South Park in the UK. That's really mind-blowing. I don't even know what impression that gives of the US, but that's awesome to know that South Park is a thing in Europe. Or at least the UK.
Unfortunately, it probably gives a fairly accurate view of the
especially
US.
Now the way that South Park has turned with its satire. Yeah, we love South Park as well. Thanks so much for writing in, Max. Our next one is a picture email. Comes from Manny. He sent us a picture of Walter, who's in the Rebus gang. And he says, in my opinion, we're looking at different timelines here. And the proof of that is from episode 3. He's showing that Walter is back. He's not in cold storage. He's holding the milk. It's a dark photo, guys. I can't really see whether or not if that's truly the original Walter.
I am so glad that he sent this picture in, so I'm not the only fool who fell for that. That is a knockoff of Walter. If you just watch the credits, you will see Walter 1 and Walter 2 listed as two different cast members. And the only time that cast member number 1 is seen, it is when Elsie is reviewing the video footage of Walter killing Rebus and pouring the milk and talking to Arnold. If you look at the pictures next to each other, they're pretty close, but they are different people.
So what's the point of the knockoff?
It's to show that they just replaced him, that he was a key element in the storyline with Rebus and the gang. The old Walter's been knocked out and put into cold storage, so you replace him with a lookalike. If that was the same old Walter who had been put in cold storage and we see him out in the park, then we know we're watching two different timelines.
Is it possible, though, that that's the predecessor to Walter? I guess he wouldn't be Walter 2 then. It'd be Walter 1A or Walter half.
I think anything's possible. Maybe they have an entire cold storage section for Walter and Rebus.
Walter Mart.
Because they obviously get into a lot of problems, and they probably get destroyed quite often.
Manny also sent in a photo, and I posted it on our Twitter. He sent us 2 comparison shots of Arnold and then a host head that was being worked on by technicians near Dr. Ford's office. Do we think that that's Arnold as a host? Or is it possibly John Locke from Lost? Are we going to see Terry is it Terry O'Neill, the actor? Because J.J. Abrams likes to recycle his actors in his series. Are we going to see it? It's Terry O'Quinn, actually. Are we going to see Terry O'Quinn come up in season 2?
Well, Manny, first of all, I want to apologize if my sense of humor doesn't come across well in text. When you asked if it was Arnold, and I just wrote back, no, it's clearly a model head. That was a joke. So, yeah, I mean, look, I think, and this is going to be funny coming from me, coming up with all my own conspiracy theories. I think at some point, kind of like Dick has said, we're going a little nuts here. I think we're seeing things where they aren't. I didn't see it that way, but if that is the case, I'd really be interested in seeing, or in theories on why you've got a replica head of Arnold kind of sitting around in the office.
Thanks, Manny, for sending those in. Keep up keep those picture theories coming in. Our next telegraph, Man in Black Ruse, comes from Gary. Hey guys, just wanted to send some kudos your way. I spent some time checking out Westworld podcasts over the last couple days, trying to see who I would be spending the season with. I'm an avid podcast listener with 10 to 14 in my current list at any given time. I want to say great job on the analysis. I don't know how you guys ferreted out all the detail that you do, but your detailed observations really added to my episode 2 experience. So my plan going forward is to watch, listen to your analysis, and then rewatch again. Thanks again. I will be recommending our podcast, this show. Couple points on theories. I recognize I could be wrong, but time will tell. I think the statement by the Ed Harris character, meaning the Man in Black, of coming here for 30 years could be a ruse to throw us off the differing time tracks a la Lost style. Do we ever see the Man in Black with any who are put in front of us as real guests? I think the answer is no. And I think that the buried gun is the exact gun that the Man in Black used, so that would put him much earlier in the time stream. Anyway, the focus on the Man in Black has me suspicious and thinking he is in fact an android. Isn't android the correct term since they are specifically mimicking humans? Once again, great show, Gary. You know, we've talked about the timelines. We've talked about the Man in Black in previous podcasts, but it's an interesting theory. Have we seen the Man in Black with other real guests, other humans?
Well, not that we're aware of. He could very well have been crossing paths with other newcomers who we have not identified as human, but none that we're aware. And that could just also, back up the claim of multiple timelines.
Gary pointed this out after episode 2, and now we've gone past episode 3, and his theory seems to be holding steady, that we haven't seen the Man in Black with any other humans. And I think that actually makes a lot of sense from the sense that, if Dolores is being asked to remember, if he triggered the events further on, maybe he was like the first to find the maze, the first to seek the maze, and then nobody goes back there for a while. Or, maybe he is something happened with the Man in Black where now is called Nowhere Land. I agree the 30-year thing could be throwing people off. We don't know when the Man in Black exists, and I'm really glad that Gary pointed that out, because I did not notice, or it didn't even occur to me that he doesn't appear with any other humans. As far as the term androids goes, glad you brought that one up too, because I always feel goofy calling them robots, and I resort to hosts, which confuses a lot of people who aren't familiar with Westworld terminology. So androids, yeah, I like it.
The only thing that adds some credence to the Man in Black's claims of going there for 30 years is the special treatment he receives from security. They treat him as a VIP. Now, whether he's actually been going there for 30 years, that would earn you that respect of being a whale in Vegas who gets special treatment. Or he could be a host who believes he's been going there for 30 years. Either one makes sense.
I think also we don't see any humans in the same scene as him, but you do see Stubbs, I believe, right, monitoring his movements. And therefore that would put us on a timeline at least where he coexists in the same era as Stubbs, assuming Stubbs is human.
Thanks so much for writing in, Gary. Our next one comes from Tim, and this is a long one, guys, but it's a really good, insightful email. So Tim is actually, as we'll find out, he works for one of the major theme parks. So his entitlement, or the title of his telegraph is Theme Park Insight, Westworld Chestnut. Hey guys, I'm loving your Westworld podcast. I've listened to a few podcasts out there, but yours has definitely been one of the more level-headed and insightful ones that has become my default go-to podcast for Westworld. Thanks so much, Tim, for that. I'm an episode behind on both the show and the podcast, but just having listened to your episode for Chestnut, I had a couple of thoughts that might be helpful to the discussion of the park itself if you haven't already discussed these points already. I'm an attraction designer illustrator at Universal Studios on the concept development team at Universal Creative. So think Walt Disney World Imagineering without the branding. It's a lot of fun to do to see how many elements of theme park development Westworld gets right, and in one case really stood out to me in the episode Chestnut. In your discussion, you brought up how a couple of technicians were planning on decommissioning Maeve because the guests weren't satisfied with or tempted by her anymore. In terms that he uses in everyday scenarios, they call that at Universal Studios the GSAT, or guest satisfaction. You wondered why they'd be so cavalier with disposing what must be multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment when a simple mind wipe and recasting would solve the problem. I think the key element to understanding their mindset is that those specific techs were with the narrative team. As members of the concept development team, a close parallel to the narrative team, our job is to pitch ideas for attractions that would provide new and exciting experiences to our guests. We brainstorm all throughout the blue sky phase without any concern to many real-world restrictions. We'll loosely devise new ride systems, new experiences, i.e. the sky's the limit. After that, our concepts goes through the engineering team, think behavior team in Westworld terms, and finance. Engineering will tell us what they can't design and what we've envisioned is because of physics or other real-world limits, and finance tells us that we don't have the budget for that. Somehow, a compromise is reached, usually involving repurposed ride systems or simple overlays. In most cases, guests don't know what they've missed out on and wind up enjoying the attractions that they ultimately get. Bringing that same process back to Westworld, when the narrative text suggests bumping up Maeve's aggressiveness by 20% as a last-ditch effort before discarding her, I figure they probably don't factor in any kind of expense. The whole focus is to serve the narrative. No one embodies that more than Lee, and it's up to the other teams to figure out how to make that happen. Behavior, on the other hand, will make more subtle adjustments, so Elsie, and repurpose what they've got. Narrative be damned. Nowhere is that better exemplified than in Lee's demands for 50 new hosts to his narrative. To him, they are simply line item. While finance and behavior, each new unit has a significant cost in both money and time. That push-pull concept between narrative and behavior is very grounded in a very real-world struggle between concept development engineering in the theme park industry. I apologize if I've gotten long-winded, but I find it fascinating to find the parallels in the show to what I encounter at work on a daily basis. I figured it might be helpful to share a little bit of that perspective, as it's quite relevant to understanding why the real world characters have such differing viewpoints as far as how to develop the guest experiences in Westworld. Thanks for your time, and thanks for a great podcast. I look forward to it each week. Best, Tim. Gene, you actually just got back from Universal Studios, and you got to experience for the first time the Harry Potter experience, correct?
That's right.
Now, if there's any theme park that has started on down this line of immersive experience, I think it's Universal Studios with what they've done with Harry Potter.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I got there actually really early in the morning to be like first in the park, so that I didn't have to wait in line, because I heard the lines were insane for this for the Harry Potter ride. And I get there and I zip right through line. I go right through Hogwarts, basically. I go through the castle. I get on the ride, and it's over. And I realize that the people who were there for an hour and a half, they got the real treat, right? They're immersed in this entire castle, and they get to look at all the little details. You know, and it used to be, I remarked on this several times while I was there, you know, it used to be you'd go to the park, Disneyland or wherever else, and you would be, you know, the line was just terribly boring. You would stand around, and it was, you know, people started getting these, you know, fast passes, stuff like that to get through with it. Now, it's, you know, you're walking through a Diagon Alley, and then you get to the Hogwarts Castle, and it's all enjoyable. You're fully immersed in it. And the key there is to, you know, and I was there in July. So, I mean, you're talking, it's hot as hell outside, and you're in a snowy, you know, Hogsmeade landscape, and they absolutely nailed it. And again, you know, you could see that, you know, all those elements in play, as Tim mentioned, you could see that where some parts of Universal Studios use lower budget and kind of overlays, whereas other ones are going fully immersive.
I think it's a testament to the writers. How many times do you see a television show that's about an industry that you're in? I'm in the technology field. Watching movies like Hackers or watching CSI, the way that they approach technology, it's laughable. When you're on the inside and you see it portrayed on the screen, you can pick it apart. So here, the fact that the behind the scenes that we've seen of Westworld, how accurate it is to real world theme parks, I think it's a credit to the writers. I think it's great.
Dick, I'm glad you mentioned that, because as a journalist who spent 12 years in the newsroom, when I watch shows like House of Cards or movies like Spotlight, I just want to go absolutely ballistic at how wrong they get it. What's interesting about this too is if you look at the Discover Westworld website and you look into the emails that are passed back and forth by employees there that have been leaked, or you look at any of this, there's economic constraints and concerns at this park. This isn't just a story that's a parable. This is something that's rooted in as much sci-fi as it is the real world, where there are things like budgets and there are things like corporate interest.
Yeah, so I wrote back to Tim and I said, well, you know, without giving any details, is there anything that you can tell me that won't jeopardize your job that you just recently worked on? And he just recently, in Universal Studios Florida, they're repurposing the Kong ride. And they're going to model that after the new Kong instead of the old Kong. So he said, you know, instead of, you know, they wanted to do this whole big, you know, brand new thing, but because of those constraints, you know, they had to be pared down. Tim, thanks so much. We hope to hear from you again. Next telegraph comes from Georgia. It's entitled Bernard's Weakness from His Son's Death. Hey guys, Georgia from Brisbane, Australia here. Wow. Again, international audience is going crazy. After watching episode 3, here's a theory that comes to my mind. I may be way off, but hear me out. We've seen over the last 2 episodes that Dr. Ford is developing a big narrative for the park. I think this episode is where Dr. Ford's new narrative is revealed and major foreshadowing for this plan is laid out. At the start of the episode, Dr. Ford brings Teddy in and promises him a new origin story based on truth that starts in a time of war, a world steeped in flames. The storyline he uploads into Teddy's narrative was about Wyatt, a host that claimed he could hear the voice of God. Perhaps the same voice that Dolores is hearing, who disappeared and came back with some pretty strange ideas. And we later find out that Wyatt doesn't fear death. He believes they're already in hell and that Westworld is it. Sound like a familiar Shakespeare quote to you? These are the same ideas that Abernathy had before he was decommissioned. Later in the episode, Dr. Ford tells Bernard that he had a partner, Arnold, who died mysteriously in the park, wanted to create consciousness for the host. I think that this is Dr. Ford warning Bernard what his big plan is for the narrative. I think Dr. Ford hopes to sway Bernard to unknowingly help in his plan, playing on Bernard's weakness from his son's death, to keep talking to Dolores and to create a domino effect of sorts. We've seen through the Teresa and Bernard conversations about Ford that he is starting to become an issue for the board and that his time at Westworld may be coming to an end. I think that Ford plans to carry out his old partner's work and send the park into chaos before he's forced out of the world that he built. What do you guys think? Love the podcast, Georgia.
So this just made me think of something. That's a very real possibility that Ford is actually pushing Bernard to create a consciousness. He says you cannot know God without being acquainted with the devil. Part of his narrative could be having Bernard create his consciousness while he's working on the other half. That's a very real possibility I hadn't thought of before.
I prefer to think of it. I love this idea, Georgia. I don't agree. I think that there's going to be the standoff in this. There's going to be standoffs in multiple scenarios, right? So there's going to be maybe Dolores versus the people who have wronged her, and there's going to be Teddy versus the Man in Black or something. And there's going to be, and I think that the standoff there is going to be Dr. Ford and Bernard, father and son, is the way I look at it, right? That they're at odds in their beliefs and their systems. But if that's not the case, this is a wonderful theory.
Georgia, we just talked about this in our episode 3 podcast. I believe that Dr. Ford is throwing in, I think that he's created this character of Wyatt based on his partner Arnold. And there's definitely kind of a good versus evil concept there with Teddy as his hero. And that, I think that there is some truth to your logic there. I think Bernard could possibly be a host, and he's manipulating Bernard to set that into motion. But we'll see in the upcoming episodes. Next comes from B. Why doesn't the Man in Black just cheat? I've heard the show compared to a video game several times, so my question is, why doesn't the Man in Black just cheat? If he has been going under the park for 30 years, and each time he gets further and further, then why not just skip through the parts that you've already been through and go straight to where you left off? Is there anything in the show to tell us that he's doing something different daily, or is he just going further into the game every day? Another question is, why would the Man in Black bother to shoot anyone? From what I understand, he's human and can't be killed or harmed. It did seem to me that one of the cousins was fighting back, but only with arm strength, no weapon. So he knows he can't be hurt, so why not just go straight for the important kill? Example, the mother of the little girl, and then proceed to what you get. Thanks, guys, B. So she's talking about here like the video game concept of starting off where you left off with a save.
I think the Man in Black is just a good sport. That's plain and simple. Like he's doing it with panache, man. He enjoys this game. Just because my girlfriend is a rank 45 in Titanfall doesn't mean that she doesn't like to wax grunts, right? Like she likes to go out and wipe out the easy guys because you can get kind of clever with that. The game is exhilarating to him. He loves playing it that way. If you notice, he's not just killing them methodically, which he also could do, right? Just line them up and shoot them all down. But rather, he's doing it with style, shooting through walls, stabbing guys through the bottom of the jaw. Also, Westworld largely operates in loops. So, like if you remember the woodcutter when he strays away from camp and they get stuck there, right? So events seem to be set in motion very specifically. And I think the Man in Black has been around long enough to recognize that he has to have patience with these loops and intersect with them in just the right way. Again, just like the maze that he's trying to get to, there is a maze that he's got to navigate in the loops.
You also have to remember, he can't just leave them alone. The hosts are going to continue playing their role. The first time we meet the Man in Black, when he humiliates Teddy, and he says, you know, you're not the man you thought you were, he starts to drag Dolores into the barn, leaving Teddy behind alive. Teddy then continues playing his narrative and shoots the Man in Black in the back. He then turns around and is like, oh my God, okay. And he shoots Teddy so he could be left alone. You can't leave the hosts alone. They're going to follow you in the barn. And that's like having your dog or pet just follow you into the bedroom when you're with the missus. You don't want that.
I mean, when you get down to it, you know, it's not like this is a chore for him, right? If we're to assume that he's human and he's been coming here for 30 years, he enjoys being there. I mean, it's fun for him, and finding new and inventive ways to kill people is a part of the game. Now, if he's a host, that's a totally different story. Now we're looking at, you know, why is it that bullets can't hurt him? But hey, man, if you're paying to be there and you can kill all you want, then why not?
So thanks, B. Hope we've answered your question. Next telegraph comes from Crichton. Uploaded consciousness. Hey guys, just listened to the show for the first time and I wanted to share a theory. In a nutshell, chestnut shell, possibly, Arnold's research into consciousness leads him to discover a way to upload his own consciousness into Westworld's programming before he dies or is murdered in the real world. This gives him the ability to communicate with the host, i.e. voices in head. The human mind is made up of the consciousness, Westworld, the unconsciousness, the real world, and the subconscious. Wow. I don't know where he's going with this, but he continues. Arnold's goal is to become the subconscious mind for all the hosts in Westworld, because when he does, all three components of the human mind will be in place and his goal of creating a sentient being will be accomplished. We see this for the first time in Dolores. When asked by Bernard why she asked him about his son, she replies, I don't know. She had her first real, non-scripted, independent thought and it scared her. She even looked slightly frightened when replying that she didn't know. As a, quote, ghost in the machine, Arnold can easily remove the weapons provision and theoretically any provision from any host at any time, as when he told Dolores to kill the scoundrel about to rape her. But on another thought, Dr. Ford and Arnold definitely didn't end things on good terms. The only time we've seen Dr. Ford show any emotion was when he was scolding the technician for covering the host. The very thought of a host having non-programmed human emotions, Arnold's main goal, seems to not only anger Ford, but send him into a rage. Have a great day, Crichton. Guys, your thoughts on this one? This is pretty deep.
So getting into the conscious, subconscious, unconscious, you know, there's the idea, I mean, the Freudian idea, right, that the brain is, or the mind is separated into these three parts, okay? So the conscious part of your brain is really the smallest part. That's the captain of the ship, right? It's the one that's making decisions. It's acting, right? It's steering things, but it's not doing all the work. Okay, you've got your subconscious, which is kind of the go-between, and that's the bulk of your brain. That's like, you know, as Ford would estimate, or Freud would estimate, 50 to 60% of your brain is that subconscious layer, and it's the go-between between your conscious mind, what you're doing, what you're deciding, and your unconscious mind, which is all of your memories, the deep. So, like, imagine the subconscious is like your short-term memory and things that you know you can pull up, kind of the RAM, I guess, and then you've got your unconscious mind, which is all of your deep memories, your old memories, and stuff like that. So I think what he's getting at is basically that Arnold could be serving as that go-between. So the hosts have a conscious mind, which is their day-to-day operations, what they do, and they've got their unconscious mind, which is that memory that they can't quite access. He's giving them access to it.
I like it. Wow. I'm glad you were here, Gene, because I don't think Big D or I could have answered that. But Crichton, thanks so much for writing in. Hope we've answered your question, and you're right back. This one comes back from Jez. Jez wrote back in after watching episode 3. She says, as I watched, I was getting more and more excited that the William equals Man in Black theory was slowly being confirmed. Examples: no logo on, or the old logo rather, on lab coats in the Dr. Ford flashback. No overlap in William's scenes with Teddy or Man in Black. Clementine doesn't ever say her line in William's scenes, and we never see Maeve in William's scenes. Then the last scene happened and it threw my whole world into disarray. I can't explain it except to say that perhaps it's not consecutive to the previous scene where Dolores rides away. In Dolores' scene, she has memory flashes, but she can't seem to tell which of the iteration of the narrative the memories are coming from and which is the current one. Is it possible that when she shows up at camp with Billy and Logan, that this is just a different iteration that she also escapes? That said, Logan makes mention of $40,000 a day, which seems to indicate that this is in the present. Sigh. And who the hell is Arnold? Theories suggest it could be Bernie, but this is not something I buy into. Examples: parallels with tragic personal loss, curiosity about host consciousness, affinity for sweater vests. In fact, I feel like there's more to the Wyatt backstory that has clues to Arnold. So, in some other fun stuff, if you hold the shift key on Discover Westworld, you get a little nice Easter egg. Robert Ford is the name of the man who killed Jesse James. Reverie by Debussy is the tune playing in Dr. Ford's office when he's speaking with Bernie. And around this time of year, October 20th, is when the Orion meteor shower reaches its peak. So those are some fun facts that she left us. But I want to go back to what she said about like the Man in Black equals William theory. I know that we talked about this a little bit before, and she gave us some examples that seem to solidify, but are we seeing a different timeline when Dolores shows up? Is that a different escape from the ranch?
I felt right away that it was put together to make people think it was a continuous scene. I don't think it was. I think we're going to run into another episode where we see Dolores off at night, and that's what leads her there. Very often they will show Dolores in a scene that leads into another scene within a different loop. I don't believe there was any continuity. It's a clear way for them to try to mask the fact that there are different timelines. But can I say, these emails are pretty good. I think not only does the show have some very intelligent viewers, I think we have some great listeners. So reading these feedback telegraphs, it's making me happy. I'm glad our audience is bright.
I find myself when I'm watching the show on HBO now, especially on the second viewing, pausing. Like it takes you like 3 hours to watch it. I'm pausing every couple seconds to see, is there anything I'm missing? What's Dr. Ford writing on that chalkboard? Like what's already written on the chalkboard? Which, by the way, there's a misspelling I noticed on the chalkboard. So either Dr. Ford is a horrible speller or someone in props needs to be booted for their poor spelling. But in all of these, I mean, it's even after all of that sifting and watching, I'm amazed when people pick up stuff that I've just completely went right past me. And so great catch on that. And I really love that Dr. Ford, instead of having the player piano like the saloon does, actually just has a guy playing the piano in his office. It was awesome.
Our next telegraph, Jez, thanks again. She wrote in twice this week, so thanks, Jez. Again, please keep those emails coming. Our next telegraph comes from Crichton. She's talking about whittling the stars. Guys, I have never written into a podcast, yet here I am. I've also never listened to your podcast before this Westworld one. It's really great. Thanks, Kristen. I love the new logo, first of all. Really beautiful artwork. Big D, our new logo. Man, you did an amazing job.
Thank you. I think we would skip that and keep moving. We're at an hour 5.
I thought it was a really great job too, though. I think you deserve some kudos for that. We'll cut 5 minutes somewhere else. I just wanted to say something about the stray host who wandered off. I don't think he self-destructed as a way to halt him from harming a human. Rather, I think he committed suicide to prevent the lab people from taking away whatever identity or self-actualization he recently discovered. This is a host who was programmed to be an artist of sorts. He starts whittling Orion on the backs of pre-programmed wood pieces as if to say he has a flip side to his programming. Looking up to the stars makes you think about one's existence. What does it all mean? Why am I here? I think it says something that he didn't whittle a flower or a bug or something concrete like that. He basically is whittling the stars because he's questioning his own reality. He's not willing to give that up, so he commits suicide, then revert back to being a controllable robot. Kristen.
So we had talked about this. I like this take. And at first, reading, I said that makes sense. I believe that if this was the case, at least the host would have said something. If the host had verbalized either some intent, when Elsie is sitting down and she's relieving herself and he's in the crevasse struggling, he would be muttering something to himself. God damn, I got to get out of this hole. He's quiet. He's in there almost mindless, milling about. If he had audibly said something, I would totally believe the suicide. What's your take on that, Gene?
I love this idea, Crichton, kind of like the opposite of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, where he wants so badly to remember and doesn't want to have that taken away from him. Basically, the idea that for them, being erased is the same as death. And I think for all of us, that's the case, right? Like, what's the part that we fear about death is that you're erased, right? Like you have no memory anymore. You don't exist. So he's going out with an act of free will. Love it. But again, to me, that would be met with some sort of again, like Dick said, a verbalization, a scream, some sign of emotion. This seemed to me calculated. It seemed that it was he was very efficient and got exactly what he needed to get, something to bash his head in, and then went ahead with the business.
Yeah, and if he had a conscience and he was choosing death over going back to his mindless slavery, there would have been a sadness. There would have been a facial expression if he was truly conscious. The sadness that he had to kill himself or be enslaved. And we didn't see that. It was a great take, and I like your take on it, Kristen, but
So this next telegraph comes from John. It's entitled, Reason Woodchopper Destroyed His Head. He gives 3 bullet points here, gentlemen. Number 1, Mr. Woodchopper destroyed his own head, so they couldn't find the aberrant code inside. Number 1A, I feel this continues to build support for my theory that the programming that AIs present to the world, both to the guests and to Dolores, is a fraud. They're not fully sentient yet, but there's a whole lot more going on there behind the scenes, and they're slowly getting smarter. The opening credits support this as well. In my opinion, the code that the player piano is being fed is not the same as it's playing. And his third bullet point is just the way that they throw various bits of code together into the AIs is horrifying me as a software architect. The voice of God plus access to old memories, the reveries, plus the possibility of infection, plus the suffering of overwriting emotional code, plus a Wi-Fi signal, whatever controls them from the iPad. This is all just a disaster waiting to happen in so many different ways. It's a wonder they function at all. John, we talked about, the realistic depiction of being a software architect in this world. Big D, you're nodding your head.
I'm horrified as well because I work in technology. Stubbs says to Elsie when they're going up in the park, there's one line of code that stops them from chopping us to bits. With everything else we've seen and the deficiencies, and they're going against every common practice when developing software or developing a technology. It's duct tape, baling wire. It's a mess. It's bound to fall apart.
I think it's important to note, though, what they're trying to do is pretty revolutionary, right? So they are really pushing the envelope. They're going full capitalist miracle wet dream, right? Like they are going for it. And in those cases, like how else are you going to get? We talked about why this place is so enchanting, right? How they make you fall in love with them, how they make you feel fear. The only way to do it is to go way overboard. Anything short of this is just robots. And so I see exactly why they're doing it. The risks are huge, but maybe, that's the thing about Westworld is to get the effect, you've got to go with those risks.
Thanks so much for writing in, John. As a software architect, I'd be interested in knowing your thoughts more as the series continues. Our next telegraph is also related to the woodcutter scene. It comes from Maria. She says, I was very disturbed by the woodcutter bashing his head in. I felt that he was self-destructing due to a highly developed consciousness of his existence as a host. I felt that he was self-destructing suicide due to his realization of the immense hopeless of his existence as a host. Dr. Ford is aware that this pain comes with consciousness. He does not want them to have a self for this exact reason. Maria.
We've heard about all the different safeties they have in place, that they can't harm the newcomers, they can't weapons provisions. We've heard about all these restrictions. Have we ever heard anything about them inflicting self-injury? Is there anything in place? It would make sense if you have money invested in all of these hosts that you would put a safety in place that they don't accidentally or just willingly walk off a cliff, that they don't destroy the goods.
I mean, I know that we're feeling bad for the woodcutter here, but one way to look at it, though, is kind of along with what you were saying, is that maybe there's a conflict in two directives here, right? Maybe the woodcutter, I mean, look at what he does I know in the last podcast we talked about the fact that he couldn't have bashed his head in down there when he was trapped in the crevasse. Sure, he could. He absolutely could. He's got robot gorilla strength, right? He could just bash his head in and crack it wide open.
But I disagree. There's the danger if he starts banging his head into the wall that he could only incapacitate himself. He might knock himself out or cause himself to lose power and fail, but still have the information in his head retrievable.
But what about this? What about if he actually wants to kill Elsie and then he stops himself from killing Elsie? His good Samaritan response actually causes him to kill himself when he's faced with the overwhelming drive to kill a human.
That's a good theory I haven't heard yet. One of the theories I did hear, though, was when Elsie's pre-programming, when she's doing all the fiddling with the iPad as he's walking close to her, did she purposely tell the host to bash his head in?
I like that. I hadn't even thought about that, but you're right. She goes bananas. She goes Chopin on that iPad.
Yeah, she could have flipped the self-destruct button.
These are really good theories. These are really good theories.
Yeah, that's possible.
Something tells me we're probably going to find out in the next couple episodes. Thanks, Maria, for writing in.
You got a big heart, Maria. Got a big heart.
Our next telegraph comes from Amanda. It's entitled Westworld Character Name Meaning. Hello, I've been listening to your podcast and getting a lot out of it. I'm amazed at the level of detail you get into. It definitely enhances my enjoyment of the show, so thanks for putting it together. I like to analyze names, and when I watched the first episode of Westworld, the name Dolores really stuck out to me because it means Lady of Sorrows. That led me into looking into the names of all the major characters that we've met so far. I found a couple interesting tidbits and thought I might interest you guys. I also gave your podcast a shout out. Thanks. I'd love to know what you guys think of this and whether you think the name meanings give us any insight to where the characters might be headed. And she gives a link to her blog. So Big D, we'll put this on the website so people can link to it. I did have a couple highlights that she points out on the website. She talked about Dolores, the Lady of Sorrows. This is a definition that plays this character perfectly, right? Like it's what started her down that whole narrative name detective path to begin with. She's, seems to be continuing, like her loop is nothing but sorrow. She goes into town, she meets the guy who she can't be with, goes back to the ranch, everyone that she loves dies, and she ends up being raped. Like that's nothing but a sorrowful existence.
Yeah, in the marketing world, when we come up with marketing personas to try to figure out how to approach a specific type of person, we don't just draw the line at their income is this, they live here, and these are the products they buy. We take it a lot further. We give them a name, a persona name, and then we build around that persona. Obviously, that name is generally reflective of what they're supposed to be. I think in any sort of a narrative department or any sort of a creative team at Westworld would probably build around that same thing, kind of like a code name for a project. It gives you a lot of direction, keeps you focused on what that host's purpose is. And as I've mentioned before, I believe that every host in Westworld has a very specific purpose. The Man in Black seems to agree.
It just shows to the level of detail that Lisa Joy and Jonathan Nolan are giving to this world. There's a couple others that I'll point out, and she has all the she goes into great detail on the website. So I'll just point you guys there. But the definition of Maeve is intoxicating, right? She's when you think of the character Maeve as a prostitute and someone that works a brothel that you'd want to sleep with, that's intoxicating. Peter, the Rock, Peter Abernathy, almost, an allegory to the disciple of Jesus, right? Of what he built his church upon. Peter being the fact, that he was programmed to be a preacher, right? I mean, that just kind of goes two in hand. William, determined protector, the white hat whole theory. And then Teddy, God's gift, the handsome gunslinger. Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy have gone through the detail of actually naming their characters and basing them on characteristics that they portray in the story. That's where I get it from. And so I totally agree with everything that Amanda's saying here. Our next email comes from Rob, Man in Black, Soul Survivor. Hey guys, loving the podcast. So I have a crockpot. He said crackpot.
He has a crockpot?
He has a crockpot theory for us.
What's he cooking for?
He's cooking up some beef and some stew. So I have a crackpot theory for you. I believe that the Man in Black is a soul survivor from the movie, or if you have the critical failure, or if you have it, the critical failure that happened 30 years ago. Let's look at the facts. What do we know about the Man in Black? Number one, he dresses eerily similar to the Man in Black from the movie. Maybe this is because he took on that persona after killing him 30 years ago. Number two, he seems to be a very special guest that gets whatever he wants. Maybe it's because he's the sole survivor of the incident 30 years ago. Number three, he says that he was born in the park and that he's been going for 30 years. Is it not possible that he was born in the park in the incident that happened 30 years ago that also changed him into the man that we see in the show? There you have it. I know it's not much, but it'd be a cool way to make the movie canon into this universe without too much trouble. Love to hear your thoughts on this, even if it's in an email and not on the podcast. Sincerely, Rob.
I would think if you survived some sort of horrific incident 30 years ago, the last place you would want to go back to is Westworld.
Exactly. If I survived Titanic, I'm not getting back on a cruise ship to go back to England. I'm not going on a cruise ship.
But we hear about these things all the time. The surfer who loses her arm and she couldn't wait to get back into the water and surf.
I feel like the writers have shown us that they're a little more clever than this. That being said, Rob, there is the possibility. We haven't been able to explain why it is the Man in Black gets whatever he wants. He's either very rich or something really bad happened that he was involved in that they feel they owe him one. And in that case, I could see that. So maybe not all these parts fit together exactly that same way. But yeah, him putting on the outfit of the guy he killed, that's just a little summer blockbuster for HBO, I think.
Also, we saw this summer the tragedy at Disney with the family with the alligator. That family's not getting a free lifetime pass to come back to the park. Having them in Disney, which I'm sure they would never really want to come back, it would be a reminder of the tragedy. If he was the survivor of the incident 30 years ago, I don't imagine that the park employees or the corporation would want him walking around as a reminder of what happened.
Our next email comes from Tom. He's talking about timelines. He writes, just an idea about the multiple timeline theory and it being debunked by Dolores finding William after she has been shot. He goes on, up until this point, we haven't seen Dolores' full day without Teddy. We know Teddy gets shot on a couple of occasions, so there must be a lot of occasions when Dolores returns home without him. Could it be possible that it is written into Dolores' narrative that she steals the gun and that Arnold's voice in her head is just unlocking the ability to use a gun as it's needed for that part of the narrative? I think it's possible that instead of being raped in the barn 1,000 times, she shot that guy 1,000 times and then been shot herself. If this is true, then it could still work as a separate timeline. Thoughts?
To me, it wouldn't make sense that you would send Dolores into the park with a timeline when she doesn't have the capability to do it. If that was part of her storyline, she would be unlocked already and have that weapons provision. Earlier in that day, we see her unable to shoot. We also see that she is shocked by the fact that she could actually shoot. If this was a loop that she had repeated before, it would be second nature to her. She would know she had the capability. It would make no sense that you would unlock them in the park. That's a safety hazard right there, that you're going to take away the protocol that would allow possibly every host to unlock abilities to use weapons, and then chaos ensues.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's part of her narrative. I think she broke the loop, and that's the whole meaning behind the hearing the voice and unlocking. But Tom, thank you so much for writing in. Last one comes from George. He asks, can we do Game of Thrones? Hello. You guys have become my go-to Westworld podcast. I love the deep breakdown of the episode and what you take on the concepts the show is trying to convey. One request. Can you do this for Game of Thrones? That would be awesome. Thanks, George A. Guys, what do you think? Do you want to do Game of Thrones?
I think we are definitely going to continue on our path down the podcast trail. We're having talks internally, but I don't know that we've come to a decision yet.
I'm still getting caught up on Game of Thrones. I think it would be a huge letdown after doing Westworld. I think you'd find us a lot less interesting with a lot less to work with. The thing with Game of Thrones, I think, is the series, the quality of the writing for me has been declining steadily since season one. And I don't believe that it's going to lend us. I think that the next season is going to be a massive disappointment for a lot of people. I don't know if that's again, referencing the Titanic, a ship that I would want to get on.
Well, I agree with you. I've been a huge fan. I've been a fan of the books, and it's clear that they had worked their way forward with the anticipation that they would have the last few books to work with. And once it became that the Double Ds were responsible, they went from 0 to 60 in about 2 seconds. They covered the ground that would normally take them 4 seasons in 1 season. And because of that, there was a lot more loose ends. Still loved the show, but I would also feel like I was being a bit cheesy to jump in at the end. I think we want to find something quality that's towards the beginning of its run.
Yeah, I think from a podcast perspective, just, the way that podcasts work, we couldn't have expected the popularity of the podcast, being fairly new to the podcast game. Of course, we've got our Shat the movies, and then another podcast as well, covering sports. But the fact that the way that these companion podcasts go, you almost have to be there from the inception. You have to be there on the ground level. You can't just jump in. Was it season 6 right now? Season 7 of Game of Thrones? Season 7? So to come in season 7, cover that, I don't know if we'd find the kind of audience that, people have already they've already found their Game of Thrones podcast, is what I'm trying to convey.
I think what I'm trying to convey, though, is thanks. That's a huge compliment in the sense that, there are other Game of Thrones podcasts out there, and the fact that you'd like us to do it is that really warms the heart.
Thanks, George A., for writing in. So that, gentlemen, that is all of the Westworld telegraphs that we've received this week. Thank you for everyone who wrote in. We really appreciate the feedback, and we hope we've answered or at least given you some insight. Again, you can check out all of our Westworld telegraphs by visiting our website, shatontv.com, and then click Telegraph, Westworld Telegraph, and all of those will be there. On behalf of my partners, Big D and Gene, this is the Raj saying we'll be back on Sunday for our Instacast of episode 4, Westworld. Take care.